Module 3, Selection. You will probably get plants and seeds from retail garden centers or nurseries, or from mail-order retailers. Large nurseries usually have a wide variety of plants. Smaller garden centers usually have a smaller stock of plants to choose from, but you can often find a more relaxed and helpful sales staff. Mail-order suppliers may carry hard-to-find or unique plants, and anything else you want as well. Nursery stock should be labeled. A good label will tell you the basics: how and when to plant, proper spacing, and the plant's hardiness zone. It should also list any special features that the plant has, such as its color, texture, or size. The following is a brief description of the major plant categories that you will come across at the nursery. At the most general level, plants break down into two groups: woody and non-woody plants. The subdivisions are listed below. Note that some plants can be listed separately from these basic categories, either because they are very popular or because they have special characteristics that they have become known by. Some of these plants are roses, herbs, vegetables, edible berries, ground covers, shade plants, and vines. Plant types. Plant types: woody. Deciduous shrubs. Woody plants that lose their leaves at the end of the growing season are deciduous. Some offer dazzling floral displays before most other plants emerge in the spring. Many deciduous shrubs bloom at other times of the growing season, so you can choose them based on their bloom period to fill gaps when many other plants are past their blooms. Some deciduous shrubs have interesting foliage and/or bark, so you can choose them for texture contrasts as well. Semi-evergreen. These are plants that may or may not lose their leaves, depending on your climate. In many instances, there are shrubs that are usually deciduous, but in southern climates are truly evergreen. Evergreen shrubs. Shrubs that do not lose their leaves count as evergreens. These include broadleafed, narrow-leafed, and needled evergreens. They are good to have in wintry climates. Deciduous trees. Same as deciduous shrubs, except trees are larger. Evergreen trees. Same as evergreen shrubs, except trees are larger. Non-woody. Annuals. Annuals live for only one growing season. They bloom profusely throughout the growing season and usually last until the first major frost in your area. You will have to replace them annually, hence the name. They are primarily chosen for their flowers, but in some cases for their foliage color and texture, because they provide continuous color throughout their growing season. They are most effective when massed or grouped. Biennials. These are good bloomers, usually not as good as annuals, that generally live for 2 growing seasons and then die. They spend their first year maturing and may not produce any flowers. During the second season, they will bloom for extended periods. Often they will self-seed, so you may not have to buy replacements. They are effective when massed or tightly grouped, since the flowers are their primary aesthetic attribute. Perennials. These plants endure year after year, laying dormant during the winter months and reappearing in the spring. They usually have a limited, 1 to 4 week flowering period, but are widely used because they don't require frequent replacement and their blooms can be quite spectacular. Since perennials rarely maintain blooms throughout the growing season, you should focus on their shape, texture, and foliage color as well as their blooms. Massing and grouping are common arrangements. Bulbs. Like perennials, bulbs bloom for a short time during the growing season and then go dormant by the end of the growing season. Unlike perennials, bulbs can survive, when dormant, for extended periods without soil or water. Bulbs are usually chosen for their blooms and generally are used to complement an existing longer-lasting floral display. Spring bulbs, so-called hardy or true bulbs, bloom while your other plants are maturing, thus giving you some early garden cheer. Bulbs are either massed, tightly grouped, or naturalized by scattering them and planting them where they fall. Succulents. These include cacti and other plants that store water in their leaves or stems. They generally prefer desert or tropical sites, although some adapt well to cooler climates and are sometimes lumped in with perennials at nurseries. They require little water and generally like full sun conditions. Specimen planting, grouping, and massing are all good choices for planting succulents, depending on their size, shape, and habit. Plant names. Plant names. Most of the time we refer to plants by their common names, and if we could, we would use them all the time. They are easy to remember, easy to pronounce, and they are familiar to us. Still, there are times when common names aren't good enough. Some plants have no common name, and there are times when common names change from region to region. There are even cases where a common name for a plant in one region is the same as a common name for a different plant in another region. Lastly, you may need to look up information on a plant only to find the reference book has plants listed by their so-called Latin names. That's when you'll need to use proper botanical plant names. We aren't going to provide a list of botanical plant names. What we will do is briefly explain the botanical naming system to give you a working knowledge of it. The botanical plant naming system, developed by Carl Linnaeus in the 18th century, is called a binomial classification system, a big phrase that means that plants have two-word names. The first word picks out the plant's genus, the generic group of plants that your plant belongs to, such as all maple trees, represented by the genus name Acer. And it is always a capitalized noun. The second word identifies the plant species. A species is a subset of a genus which includes all plants of a particular kind. For instance, all sugar maples, or in Latin, Acer saccharum. And the species name will be an uncapitalized adjective. The species name is usually descriptive in that it will tell you something about a particular habit or trait that a plant may have. Example, Juniperus horizontalis, or creeping juniper. The genus, Juniperus, identifies the plant as a juniper, and the species, horizontalis, describes the plant according to its horizontal spreading habit. You may find a few variations on the basic plant name. A botanical plant name with two names separated by an X indicates a hybrid which is a cross between two different plants. Example, Abelia grandiflora, or glossy abelia. The initials VAR after the name indicate a natural variant of the plant. Example, Salvia azurea variety grandiflora, or blue sage. Single quotation marks around a plant name or the initials CV indicate a cultivated variety. Example, Dicentra spectabilis alba, or white bleeding heart. The terms variety and cultivated variety are often used interchangeably, even though they technically have slightly different definitions. They are used to further distinguish or describe a subset of a species which has been singled out for a particularly desirable quality. For example, a cultivar or variety could have enhanced hardiness, a longer bloom time, or a unique color. Plant selection. Plant selection. A few tips for dealing with nursery staff. Remember, the more information you have about your site, the better the chances of getting meaningful help. Armed with the skills and data you gathered from working through this course, you can ask better questions, have a better idea of what you're looking for, and give the salesperson enough information to better answer your questions. Instead of saying, "I have a shady area in my yard, what can I do?" you can, for example, say, I have an area that is part shade. It receives 3 hours of direct sunlight per day. The soil is slightly acidic, a pH of about 5.5, is a heavy clay loam that gets compacted very easily, and there is a lot of wind with little structure to protect it. What plants would you recommend? Find knowledgeable employees. Nurseries often hire part-time help, students, and otherwise inexperienced people who are just learning the nuances of gardening. Most of what they can tell you is basic information, so try to find the expert on the staff. Most nurseries have at least one. What to look for when selecting plants. In general, your best bet is to buy only healthy-looking, shapely plants. Plants that are droopy, wilted, discolored, or lanky will take longer to mature and will require a lot of nursing. Look at the whole plant. Sometimes wounds are hidden beneath the foliage. Healthy plants will transplant better and mature faster. When choosing plants in containers, avoid those with lots of roots growing outside of the container, as they indicate a crowded root system that may inhibit healthy growth. This is especially pertinent for woody plants that may develop a deformed root system, which contributes to a fast rate of decline. When choosing balled and burlap plants, look for crowded roots, for the reasons stated above. Plants with excessively hard root balls may have trouble extending their roots into the soil. In all cases, handle balled and burlapped plants carefully. With bare root plants, there isn't much to look for other than a healthy-looking root system. The more roots, the quicker the plant will adapt to its new garden. When buying non-woody plants, look for a generally healthy appearance and beware the presence of weeds in the pot. Large weeds growing close to the roots can be difficult to pull without harming the plant. Also, plants that are not in bloom will usually transplant better than those with blooms. Note: contrary to what people usually think, buying larger plants does not ensure your garden will mature faster. Research shows that over extended periods, plants that are smaller when purchased exceed the larger ones in growth. This is especially relevant when buying trees.